We will start this week with NXT and AEW. We know they're on separate nights, but it still feels like you should talk about them together. And someone that has had personal experience, especially with NXT recently, joins me now on the Vaqueros Cafe and Cantina hotline. It is our good friend. He covers wrestling and combat sports for Sports Illustrated, Justin Barrasso. Follow him on Twitter at Justin Barrasso. Justin, it's good to talk to you, my friend.
So it's great to hear your voice. How are you?
Doing well. It's summer. It's you were just telling me before we went on the air you were heading back from the North Shore to heading back to Boston. So I hope that was a pleasure trip as much as anything.
Well, one of the positives of there's been so many negatives of the COVID world, less traffic, but I feel like once we get that traffic back, it'll feel even more normal. So it's nice that the world is hopefully safely taking steps to kind of being back to what it was. So, but in terms of wrestling, I'm with you. I always think of, you're right. I know they're not both on Wednesday nights, and even AEW's been on Fridays recently, but I always think you can't help but think of NXT and AEW together.
Yeah, absolutely. And believe me, we know something about traffic here in the ATX. Let's start with NXT. Sure. And, and lo and behold, I tune into the NXT Takeover pre-show. There you are, standing there with Sam Roberts. So I know you wrote about it in your column in Sports Illustrated, but just kind of reflect on that experience. How fun was that to actually be a part of the production of NXT Takeover in your house?
Well, that's the thing, Stu. That was the best part for me, too, the access, right? I was able to spend the day there and watch pretty much from start to finish with that show. In return, I was able to go on the air, too. So originally, it was supposed – I don't know how much I've got into the story, but originally it was supposed to be more of like a college game day setup. We were at a table and talking and breaking down more insight. Because really, if you watch the pre-show – the amount of time you had, just the nature of the beast, you're really talking in sound bites. It was so quick, even though it's a half hour. There's video packages. There's so much to get through. So it was interesting. So really, when we were on our way over to go live to tape, was when it was like, hey, we're not going to be sitting, we're going to be standing, and we're going to change the format a little bit. We're going to tweak it, and at that point in the game, it's either you do it or you don't, right? There's no questioning or thinking about it or talking about it. We had about 5 minutes before we went live to tape. So the whole process was interesting. I think I may have been a little bit stronger in a more like insight role, Stu, than hype. Hype's not really my thing, but hey, it was a pleasure to be a part of that, to be a part of the process, to get a better sense of what the performers go through, especially on a show day, on a game day.
Right.
Even just seeing Xia Li sitting in that makeup chair for hours upon end, she's in there for over 2 hours, and they were, of course, too, you're still nervous about the show that night. You got a match to wrestle. The whole thing was great. Talking to Cameron Grimes earlier in the day, building toward his match, thinking about his dad, who was a very proud pro wrestler. Also, from Cameron, like the Hardys, and they were close. Little things like that, getting a different sense of the women and men that comprise NXT throughout the day. Seeing talent that wasn't on the card, but was eager to watch the show that night, eager to make their imprint in NXT. And Stu, you never know when you're around, but I was kind of a fly on the wall, so you can get a decent sense of morale, and I thought it was very strong. I think in some ways, and I'd have to be backstage to see, but I think maybe a little bit more collegial than Raw or SmackDown. I think they've got a good thing in NXT, and I know Hunter, Triple H is so proud of it, and I enjoyed the show. I mean, their takeover was more of a table setter to live crowds, to bigger shows later this summer, but I enjoyed the show and enjoyed the experience.
What was the biggest surprise to you during that experience?
Well, it's a good question. I don't know if I'd say biggest surprise, but it maybe confirms what I already thought. But until you live it, it's a little bit different. Now, again, we were live to tape, so it's what, a 15-minute. I mean, it went on a few minutes after we taped, but it was a one take, and it went live, so it was live to tape. So I guess just the the idea of the producer in your head and three things. And even if he's not speaking to you, if he's talking to, for instance, Sam Roberts, I mean, you can still hear it, right? So you're kind of focused on what you want to say next. And I was not scripted, but I knew, what match Sam would be talking about next. And I had an idea of the points I wanted to hit. So I think that just I don't know if I'd say surprise, but revelation, just experiencing that, Stu, experiencing that live WWE programming in that format. And that was not Vince McMahon in my head. It was NXT. But again, kind of getting a better sense of what their broadcast team, this is the pre-show, goes through. So I just think it gave me a better sense of what they do. I think that was the biggest takeaway for me throughout the day, particularly to the programming part of it.
Yeah, and I can understand that. Having been backstage for AEW, just seeing the process is such a fascinating thing to watch. So I can understand that. Let me ask you this. So Karrion Kross successfully defended his NXT championship in that fatal 5-way. It seems like they kind of, I don't know if was it the sense of they seem to blow out those challengers, and if so, who's the next person to stand up to challenge Karrion Kross? Because it feels like he's kind of in that same boat as Roman Reigns in that it's kind of hard to imagine somebody taking that title off that's currently on the roster.
Which is why I thought it would have been interesting to have him to a Gargano or to somebody and have a bit of a transitional champ, especially if they fast track Kross. Karrion Kross is so talented, and that works with Scarlett too. If they're going to fast track into the main roster, which he would be a great help to either Raw or SmackDown, why not? And you got a perfect scenario here where he doesn't need to lose, right? You can do some crazy spot outside the ring, which they did with the table, and he doesn't need to lose. So I actually thought they had it out there, and it would have surprised people, and it would have really given the In Your House takeover something distinct to remember it by. I suppose we had the $1 million title match, but nothing like the world title changing hands to close out a show. So I thought they had an opportunity there. They didn't take it, obviously, and they want to build with Kross. But I think sometimes we don't always see, there's two different objectives at hand, right? There's one from Vince and one for Hunter, and Vince's normally wins. So it seems like Kross is being fast-tracked to the main roster, but at the same point, he's still NXT champion. Do they want to build something with Gargano? You're right, though. It almost felt like if you wanted to pick one of those guys, Pete Dunne's doing something else now. If you wanted to pick one of those guys, you pick one of those guys. Cole's back with O'Reilly. Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting, the directive of the world title, and they're probably playing that week by week too in terms of what happens with Kross. Does he go to the main roster? What do you do with the belt if he does? I thought that would have been an easy out because Karrion Kross, that character, is so good. He doesn't need the title, especially when he didn't need to drop it in a situation like the 5-way.
Absolutely. Talking with Justin Barrasso from Sports Illustrated. You just mentioned about how you felt that TakeOver seemed to be the table setter for going back to live in front of crowds. And, of course, they've got the crowds there at the Capitol Wrestling Center. Let me ask you this. Has there been talk of them renewing their deal with Full Sail University, or do they stay there at the PC and at the Capitol Wrestling Center and just keep it there with their occasional loops throughout Florida?
It's a good question. I actually recently asked that too, and I haven't got a definitive answer. I still think the plan is to go back to Full Sail, but that's something that, with the Capitol, because the Performance Center is not a television studio. I mean, it's turned into one, right? But I mean, the Performance Center should be what they envisioned it for, and it's not live TV taping every week. So I still think they go someplace. I think the relationship with Full Sail works so well. I'll check on that again too. I do think that's I would be surprised if they run out of the Performance Center or Capitol Wrestling Center. I think it's just a great venue though to have specials or one-offs or whatever you want to do, and you could open it up to a small audience. Similar to, it makes me think of, I know it's a different setting now, Stu, but Gargano Ciampa when they did their PC match.
Mm-hmm.
like, and they fought throughout the weight room and all that. Like, to me, it's that type of setting. It's perfect for something different, but not your weekly television. So I'd be surprised if they stay at the PC.
Interesting. Do you think they might expand to, like, maybe build a studio, so to speak, to attach it to the PC and make that the Capitol Wrestling Center?
It's a good idea. I think, WWE, and that's another part of being at the show, they've bought a lot of that land in that area, in that performance area in Orlando. So I don't necessarily know that they haven't broke ground on that, right? So it would take time. I think going back to somewhere like Full Sail where they're very comfortable would make more sense. And that crowd was about the right size for a weekly NXT show. You don't have AEW's got a different touring model, and they've got bigger shows and bigger venues and really a diverse traveling schedule too, just different cities week to week. So I don't think so. I think it's more likely they end up in a place like Full Sail moving forward.
Okay. All right. Couple things that we have, one thing we saw last night on NXT and something we will see soon. Let's start with what we saw last night to end the show. Diamond Mine shows up. Roderick Strong, Tyler Rust, Hideki Suzuki. They attack Kushida. What do you see going forward for this new faction in NXT?
Well, I like the fact that they're trying to build around the Cruiserweight title. And if you're going to do that, you've got Kushida. I know he lost the match to O'Reilly last night, but Kushida's a great champion. Sometimes you wonder, though, if that title is just... Obviously, it's a stepping stone, which isn't the worst thing, right? The Intercontinental title was a stepping stone, or the U.S. title was a stepping stone for a long time to go after the world title. I don't know how you fix that. That title's got such an image of a lower tier title. So I think you need great matches, and more than that, still you need great stories. So hopefully Roddy and Kushida can help deliver that. And then you've got Malcolm Bivens and just a fun, exciting new faction in Diamond Mine. I think there's a lot of potential there. It's a bit of an uphill battle just because of the history of the Cruiserweight title. Regardless of the amount of talent they've had, and they've had some very talented stars hold that title, it's just got the perception as it's a little bit less than the other belts. Right. Which is funny because you wouldn't see that in MMA, for instance, with a different weight classes or different weight classes. It's a little different in wrestling. So I don't know. They've definitely got an uphill battle there, but I think if it's presented the right way, it goes a long way, and that's in the main event. I liked how it closed out the show. They've closed out the show with Santos Escobar. I hope, and I think they will, but I hope they have the mindset that this is going to take time. This isn't 2 weeks of main events and it's a major title. Like, it's going to take time to build that title into something. And if they go on with that approach, especially with the players they have involved in it right now, there's definitely reason for optimism.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you've seen other organizations, whether it's the NWA, New Japan, they do well with a cruiserweight or junior heavyweight title. So you hope NXT can find a way to highlight that cruiserweight title more, and hopefully, the introduction of Diamond Mine could help, as well as others. The other thing
good stories, right?
Yeah, good stories. The other thing, we see these charging videos, the 30%. I think it's up to 41%. Any thoughts on the identity of who is behind the charging vignettes on NXT?
Not to the point where I'd want to speculate. I'm excited too, though. I think a good surprise when done right in wrestling is very exciting. So, no spoilers this morning for me, Stu, but I'll keep checking on it. Again, I think that NXT does a nice job of building intrigue. Their shows for so long were built around takeovers. So it's a different model now. They're built around weekly television. I do like, even when they were losing the ratings week to week to AEW, I like how they set up the shows. It's an old school wrestling show where every segment means something. And to throw a surprise in there here and there is exciting too. So I'm excited to see where that goes.
I am too. I just, it's fun to speculate, and there's a countless people that we could attach to that. But yeah, you're right. And as hard as it is to have a surprise in wrestling nowadays,
Yeah.
I'm hoping we do get an actual surprise. It's someone that maybe nobody ever thinks of. So I'm looking forward to that. Let's switch to AEW. And you mentioned, AEW's about to go back on the road. Let's start with the big announcement they had last week about doing Dynamite September 22nd at Arthur Ashe Stadium there in New York, the home of the U.S. Open tennis tournament. First of all, I can't remember the last time. I don't think Arthur Ashe Stadium, easy for me to say, has ever hosted a wrestling event or anything else outside of tennis. So this seems to be a really bold move for AEW's introduction to a live event in New York. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's phenomenal. I think that AEW, this is who they were before the pandemic. And obviously they definitely took chances during the pandemic as best they could, right? They did the Stadium Stampede and things of that nature. But part of their business model was to be different than WWE. And that is a perfect example here. Or to air part of the show on the Jericho cruise ship or just be different. And the visual of that show is going to be outstanding. Center court at Arthur Ashe. I mean, and again, that's a big part of New York too, in Queens. So an important part. I think it's a great idea. I think it presents AEW in a different light. And if you have, to me at least, one of my criticisms of WWE is they are very successful. Right? They're printing money. They're so successful. But to the point where they're not everything's going so well, they're not taking chances on television creatively because they don't need to. It's almost like you don't want to step on the other foot. AEW is the opposite. They are constantly taking chances. I think it's fantastic. I think it's going to, I mean, just to think of the pomp and circumstance that week of the show, it's going to be so exciting. So I'm extremely excited. And they could have went to something like the Prudential, or of course that would have been great too. But there's something unique about this. I think the sightlines are going to be good. I'm sure the crowd will be red hot. To me, this is why and I know wrestling obviously matters too, the matches, the opportunities. But in terms of business model and taking the industry in different directions, I think this is where AEW really shows their worth.
And by the way, if they don't get John McEnroe as a special referee, then why are we even doing it?
What are we doing? Right.
Let me ask you this. So as I mentioned, they're going back on touring. They got Miami. Then they come here to the Austin area. They're going to be at the HEB Center at Cedar Park. They'll be in Garland, the DFW area. What happens to Dark and Dark Elevation when that happens? Because they won't have the – I can't see where they would have the luxury of taping 10, 12 matches for each of those shows like they do there at Daly's Place, because they're only at Cedar Park Center or HEB Center. It'll always be Cedar Park Center to me for one night. They're only at the Colwell Center for one night. What happens to those two shows on YouTube when they get back on the road? Do we go back to 5 or 6 matches? And not to mention Dark Elevation wasn't even around when they were touring.
Right, there were definitely less matches for Dark when they were touring. They still have Daly's Place too, so I those shows are still embedded in AEW's culture and game plan, business plan moving forward. Stu, I'll ask the next time I speak with Tony about the number of matches, but I have not heard anything about changing the format of the shows. I mean, they've got broadcast teams they trust with both those programs. I mean, that's Elevation. I know they certainly have big plans for as well. Mm-hmm. So I think Daly's Place, having that is in your back pocket in case you need to tape more, because to me it would make more sense to do long tapings, knock them out, put them in the can, and then be able to have them. But that's a good question. Another area I'll put in my notes too, and check next time I speak with Tony.
And and I know they've got other resources, whether it's the Nightmare Factory in Georgia, for that matter. Right. They could go to Dustin's school here in the Austin area, up in Leander. Both those could be set up as some sort of a alternate location as well, especially when they come to Texas. They Dustin School's right here. It could be set up to where you could have Dark or Dark Elevation there, I think it would work. Let me ask you, one of the things that we've talked about a lot is Kenny Omega. He's got three titles right now with the AEW World Title, the Impact World Title, and the AAA Mega Championship. Which title does he lose first?
Well, let's go through each. I don't think he loses at Slammiversary to Sami Zayn, so I think he retains the Impact title through the summer. I don't know if Sami was their top choice. It's a good choice for them because he's so embedded with the Impact product. So I think he holds on to that title at Slammiversary. And I still think, just from following the storylines, I still think he retains in Mexico City in August because the next big story for Andrade will be Psycho Clown.
Right.
And you don't need a title. I mean, Psycho Clown's so popular and just so over. And that mask is the most popular mask in AAA. And I don't know. I don't think you need the world title for it. To me, the title is the story. That's not the story for them. So it's better to, and Conan's so smart about how he books. I think that Kenny actually holds that title too. And then I'm excited, very excited. I think it's one of the more organic moments in a very manufactured business or industry, this Kenny Omega Jungle Boy match. And no, Jungle Boy's not going to win. But what a fun match. And the idea that we're going to see Jack Perry take the next step in his evolution. Mm-hmm. I'm really excited for that match. That's a week from Saturday. So right now, I don't see any Kenny in danger of losing any of these belts. I think that I don't know. I think he's going to hold on to. I mean, for sure, he's holding on to the AEW belt for a considerable while. I suppose if I had to choose, I'd say AAA, but they like having Kenny involved. He's a great piece to their shows. He's different. It's not so much like a weekly TV like an Impact, where if he misses tapings, it's like not like Brock Lesnar, Stu, where he's not on Raw. And it's like, where's the champion? Right. It's not like that at all. It's just a different setup. So it actually makes sense that he's the champ there. And he doesn't need to close out shows either necessarily, because there's usually something different going on with it. Mask versus hair or mask versus mask, or there's something else to close out these major AAA shows.
Right.
So I'll say Impact then. I don't know. Okay. I probably Bound for Glory. Maybe he drops that belt, and we'll see who emerges as a title contender by then. But that's the fall. I think he's going to hold on to these for a while.
That was the thing I was thinking, is probably the Impact title at Bound for Glory. I'm thinking could be Moose, but I could be wrong. Now that you say it, yeah, you're probably right. He probably holds on to the AAA title, so we'll see. And yeah, he's staying with the AEW title for the foreseeable future. But you're right. To see this next step in Jungle Boy, his evolution to become more of the iconic faces, for lack of a better term, for AEW. I like that. Let's close out with this. One of the things that has been talked about a lot, especially with the recent releases by WWE, is who goes to AEW. So I just did a quick check on their website, and I did a quick count. From what I can tell, they list approximately 100 wrestlers on their roster. This is not counting the announcers, not counting the refs. Men and women, there are approximately 100 wrestlers. Is AEW's roster too crowded?
Probably, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, talent rises. There are other places to work if it doesn't work at AEW. And you start with the industry leaders, Stu, in WWE. And that roster, even after cuts, and even after the cuts, that roster's still extremely crowded and extremely deep. I think that AEW is building depth, and you can never have too much of it. I think it was the Mania in Texas, wasn't it, Stu? Wasn't that 32?
Yes.
When that was just a card, to use an example, that card was just so it wasn't the card they wanted. And that happens, right? I mean, wrestling's a physical industry and injuries happen. And for AEW too, you're building stars and who catches on, who catches lightning in a bottle. So is the roster a little too big? Probably. But they've got a plan. And I think depth is certainly, Tony Khan does not want to get caught. And not that they would never have, especially in the COVID era, but even beyond that. I think they're looking for the next big thing. They want roster depth. It's so important for them to grow. They've got 3 shows right now. They've got Rampage coming out, which I haven't loved. Dynamite on Friday nights is just taking me out of my. I'm used to watching on Wednesdays. I want to watch on Wednesdays. But the good thing about Dynamite on Friday nights, it kind of set the standard and the tone that, hey, Rampage is coming, and it's coming on this time frame. So it kind of put that in the back of your mind. They've got that show coming. So I suppose, and if a talent's frustrated, then I'm sure they'll tell you that the roster's too crowded. But I don't think so. I think that I don't think it's a bad thing. I'll put it that way.
Okay. Well, then let's just speculate. Last thing, I promise. Who shows up from that group of recent WWE releases? Who shows up on AEW? Because somebody will. Yeah,
I mean, Tommy and Aleister Black would make a lot of sense. I still think Braun, Adam. This is just my own gut feel, and I'll continue to follow this. I still think he ends up back there, Braun Strowman. Or to me, if you're Strowman, I think Japan would make a lot of sense too. But he's a WWE guy, trained in their system. I'd be surprised if Braun's not back in WWE. Ruby Riott, I feel like, would be a phenomenal choice to head your women's division, either in AEW or Impact for that matter. But Aleister Black would make a lot of sense. I mean, he can go in the ring. I mean, you could easily you could start something new too, Stu. But I mean, I think there's more of a story to be told between Andrade and Aleister and that, or Tommy, or whatever he goes by in AEW. I think he'd be a great fit. So if I had to choose one, I'll say Aleister Black. What about you?
I lean Aleister Black, Tommy End. I think that would be a good fit. I agree with you. Ruby Riott would be an absolute home run on either women's roster, either AEW or an Impact. I could see her joining AEW. Braun just doesn't feel AEW. And maybe just because he is a WWE grown talent. So I don't know if he goes back to WWE. Or if he, or like you said, maybe he tries his hand in Japan. That would be a big splash as well. So, but
New Japan. I mean, Ishii Strowman. I mean, he wouldn't be Braun Strowman. I don't know what he'd be, but I agree it would be so different. I think with live crowds there's nobody like. There's a lot of giants in wrestling. There's nobody like Adam. Sure, Braun he's just so special. That would be if he went to Japan, and that's obviously too. That's a long flight. It's it's a lot of travel involved. Wrestling's already all travel, but it's even more so now when you're leaving the continent. Would he want to do that? I don't know, but they'd have to find the right price. But he would be phenomenal for New Japan.
Yeah, long flight. Plus, you're usually there for 3 to 4 weeks at a time. I talk to Lance Archer a lot about those tours in Japan. So I get you. He is Justin Barrasso. Catch everything he does at Sports Illustrated, at SI.com. Follow him on Twitter at Justin Barrasso. Justin, it's great to catch up with you. I look forward to one of these days being in the same arena with you. And
would love to grab an iced tea and a hamburger. Stu, when am I going to see you again?
We gotta figure that out. I gotta find a way to get you there. Maybe you can come to one of the AEW cards in Texas. Maybe I'll treat you some Texas barbecue.
I would love that. Any chance it would be at SummerSlam, or that's up in the air?
I think that's up in the air. I got to get ready for football and everything, so that may be up in the air. But we'll find a way. We'll find a way. I promise. Justin, all the best to you, my friend. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks so much.